Tonight we drift into the pale glow of a Ming-Era midnight, where the Yangtze exhales a slow, silvered mist that softens everything it touches. You stand on the cracked planks of an old dock, listening to water slap lazily against hulls. Lanterns sway overhead like sleepy fireflies. You take a breath of humid night air thick with reed scent and wood smoke, and step toward the barge that will carry you deep into China's beating trade artery. Of course, a tiny voice reminds you that without modern safety standards, life on these waters is a daily gamble and you probably won't survive this. But hey, great bedtime vibes. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The barge deck sighs when you board, as though relieved to gain a passenger who weighs substantially less than the crates stacked beside you. They are packed with millet, hemp rope, and two suspiciously heavy boxes the crew refuses to talk about. A ferryman with a beard that could double as a mop gestures you toward a coil of rope to sit on. "Stay low," he mutters. "River spirits like to trip the tall ones." You can't tell if he's joking, but given your track record of tripping over nothing on flat floors, you obey. The vessel pushes away from the dock with a slow, deliberate shove, and the water beneath you accepts the intrusion with a slurp. You float out into the channel where dozens of other boats rock gently, some tiny fishing craft, some heavy cargo junks, one showing off with carved phoenixes on its bow like it's trying to win a river-based fashion show. Cool mist clings to your hair, and the breeze tastes of wet wood and a faint tang of fermented fish, an aroma you'll get very familiar with over the coming miles. The boatman at the stern works an enormous sweep oar, guiding the barge into the faint current. Lantern light paints the surface gold, then snuffs it into blackness as the river narrows behind a bend. You settle into the rhythm, water, wood, breath. But your guide, Old Wren, because everyone on rivers is nicknamed Old Something, regardless of age, keeps glancing upriver. "Tide's being tricky tonight," he mutters. "Even the Ming Navy couldn't predict this one." That's your first mainstream historical fact right there. The Ming maintained a massive naval presence along the Yangtze, especially after the 14th century, using patrols to check smuggling, piracy, and the occasional overly exuberant merchant. You ask Old Wren if pirates are still a problem. He chuckles. "Pirates? Sure. But it's the tax collectors you watch for. River pirates will only rob you. Tax collectors will rob you and make you feel grateful." You file that away as joke number one. He strokes his beard thoughtfully. Historians still argue whether the mid-Ming tax reforms helped or hurt river trade. Me? I say they hurt my wallet, and that's all the evidence I need. As your barge drifts farther from the town's lights, the river widens into a mirror that shows the moon twice, once above you, crisp and white, and once beneath, hazy and wavering like it's already half asleep. The only sound is the quiet splash of the sweep oar and a crewman humming a tune about a monkey who stole a silk hat. It's catchy, and you try not to hum along, but fail. A soft thump rattles the deck. You look down to find a frog about the size of a dumpling glaring up at you with the weary judgment of an elderly professor. Before you can react, it hops onto your knee, decides this is not prime real estate, and hops away again. Old Wren grins. "River messenger," he says. "Means safe passage." Then he adds, "or rain. Or that you're going to lose something important. Hard to remember which." The fog thickens, swirling around the hull like slow-moving cotton. The lantern at the bow becomes a blurry orange halo. The crew grows quieter, speaking in murmurs as though raising their voices might wake something they'd rather let sleep. You overhear a debate about whether the moon tonight looks more like a peeled lychee or a chipped porcelain bowl. It becomes surprisingly heated. The current nudges the barge faster and Old Wren adjusts course with a grunt. "Hear that?" he whispers. You focus. Beneath the water's usual music, there's a deeper rumble, steady, distant, almost like thunder that forgot its own schedule. Big rafts upstream, he says. Timber trade out of Sichuan. We'll run alongside them by dawn. A hint of excitement sparks in his eyes. Good men. Loud snores. Ahead, the river forks around a dark islet of reeds. The barge veers left, gliding through eel-slick channels where fish dart under the hull and the air smells faintly of algae and night blossoms. Someone on the crew drops a ladle with a clatter, and everyone jumps as if the river itself scolded them. To ground yourself, you look upward. Stars scatter across the sky like spilled rice, and the Milky Way stretches in a faint smear. For a fleeting moment, you feel like you're drifting not across China but across the entire night. Then the barge bumps something. Not a log. Too soft. Too floppy. The crew tenses. You lean over the side and spot a floating sack. It bumps the hull again. The youngest crewman pokes it with a pole, muttering nervously. The sack rolls, spilling open just enough to reveal ducks. 4 of them. Sleeping soundly, bobbing in their portable feathered apartment. You laugh before you can stop yourself. Joke number 2. Old Wren shrugs. Farmers float livestock downstream sometimes. Saves legwork. Ducks don't mind. You're relieved it wasn't something more sinister, like a ghost, or worse, laundry. As the night deepens, the river widens. The fog thins to drifting veils, and the breeze warms slightly. Someone brews tea on a tiny brazier, the steam carrying the grassy scent across the deck. You sip from a wooden cup and nearly burn your tongue, because of course you do. The tea leaves dance in the water like tiny green ribbons. Local stuff, a crewman says. Picked up river. Not the fancy tribute tea, but good enough to keep you awake. You appreciate the honesty. Conversation drifts to legends, how a white serpent spirit once crossed the Yangtze disguised as a woman. Old Wren swears his cousin's cousin saw her. Or maybe just a very committed street performer, he adds. Joke number 3 checks in, fashionably late. Your barge glides into a slow bend where the water deepens. Shadows stare along the far bank, fireflies circling the reeds, flickering gold. Somewhere, a crane calls, its voice stretching long and thin over the black water. The crew settles into their tasks. The world quiets. And you, wrapped in mist, tea warmth, and the low heartbeat of the river, feel yourself easing into the journey, toward those lumber rafts you'll meet at dawn. Dawn lifts slowly over the Yangtze, like someone pulling back a silk curtain with great reluctance, and you drift into a new wash of color. Soft apricot light spreading across the water while the mist thins into gauzy ribbons. The barge hums with morning energy. Someone coughs, someone else drops a ladle for the second time in 12 hours. And Old Wren mutters that morning always arrives 10 minutes earlier than he wants it to. You're still rubbing sleep from your eyes when you notice the silhouettes. At first they look like log islands, dark, impossibly long shapes drifting in single-file processions. As your barge edges closer, the silhouettes resolve into enormous timber rafts, some hundreds of feet long, each a floating spine of cedar, cypress, or pine lashed meticulously with thick hemp rope. A dozen men dance across the rafts with the casual balance of people who've forgotten what solid ground feels like. They shove long poles into the riverbed to steer, tapping them rhythmically like they're playing a slow, watery drum. Old Wren waves at them. Good morning to the loudest snorers on the river, he yells. The nearest raft boss cups his hands and shouts back something involving Wren's beard and a startled buffalo. Friendly banter, obviously. Your barge drifts alongside the lead raft, close enough that you can see the men's bare feet gripping wet wood and the sheen of early morning sweat on their shoulders. The scent hits you next, resin-rich, sharp, and clean, like walking into a forest that volunteered to turn itself into boat parts. One of the polemen calls out, "First time on the river?" You nod. He grins and gestures at the logs beneath him. "Don't fall in. Sharks." Another poleman elbows him. "There are no sharks in the Yangtze." Then, to you, historians still argue whether the giant fish upriver ever reached these stretches, but he tells tourists they are sharks because it gets better reactions. You appreciate the honesty, and the helpful reminder to not fall in. A mainstream historical fact floats your way as old Ren leans against the railing. "Timber like this," he says, "kept the empire standing. Palaces, ships, bridges." Ming records show whole mountain slopes of Sichuan cut and floated eastward. Cheaper to ride the river than haul anything by land. He watches the polemen dance across their moving platform. These men know the currents like family. Better than family, sometimes. The raft boss steps lightly to the edge. He's lean, sun-baked, and wearing trousers patched more times than your favorite childhood game console. "Currents changing," he calls. "We've got a bend ahead. Be ready." His voice rings with authority earned over decades. The crew on your barge mutters and moves into position, not because they are worried, but because ignoring a raft boss is a great way to end up denting someone's timber supply. As you pass between two rafts lashed side by side, you notice something odd, a small shrine nailed onto one of the logs. It's made of driftwood and twine, holding a tiny clay figure with big round eyes and a lopsided hat. River Guardian, a younger poleman tells you. Wards off snagged ropes, cut feet, and bad tempers. He lowers his voice. "The last one we had fell in the water and we had 2 arguments before breakfast." The crew begins calling out short, clipped warnings. Left drift, shallows, brace, and you feel the river change beneath you. The water grows faster, tugging the barge eastward. The timber raft to your right tilts ever so slightly. Its polemen respond instantly, thrusting their poles deeper with practiced force, the logs shifting in a unified ripple. You brace yourself too, gripping the rope coil beside you. The barge hums with tension. The sound of wood grinding on wood echoes as the raft edges close enough that you could reach out and touch the cedar logs. In fact, one of the raft men does reach out, not to fend off your barge, but to toss you a strip of dried persimmon as he laughs. You catch it by sheer luck, realizing you've just succeeded at your first piece of Ming-Era river park hour without moving an inch. The river narrows ahead, framed by high banks tangled with bamboo. A heron lifts lazily from the reeds and glides over the convoy. For a quiet moment, it feels as though the entire river is holding its breath. Sunlight flickers over the water in thin shards. Then the current kicks. Your barge surges forward with a lurch that nearly knocks you sideways. The raft beside you shudders, logs straining against their lashings. The raft boss signals with a sharp whistle. His polemen leap into motion, driving their poles into the riverbed with the intensity of people trying to stop their entire workplace from escaping downstream without them. Old Ren grins like he's riding a roller coaster built entirely by unpaid interns. "Perfect morning for this," he says. "Gets the blood moving." And occasionally the boat. Water sprays your face as the barge rides the surge, and you hear a rapid drumming, pole taps, timed perfectly, echoing between the rafters like coded river Morse. You watch them lean into their work with practiced grace. They shout warnings to each other across moving logs, correcting drift that would otherwise send them scraping into rock. It's mesmerizing. It's also mildly terrifying. Joke number 1 of the section comes uninvited as old Ren shouts, "If you fall in, swim toward the raft. It's softer than the rocks." Usually. The bend spits the convoy into a wider basin where the current slows abruptly, like the river decided to take a mid-morning break. The polemen visibly relax, leaning on their poles as though posing for an accidental group portrait. One waves you over, and you hop to the barge's rail to hear him. "We camp tonight near Willow Spire," he says. "Good hot soup. Bad snoring. Bring earplugs if you believe in mercy." Your barge pulls ahead slightly, and you see the full scale of the raft, hundreds of logs lashed into sections, each tethered to the next. Small banners flap at the corners, marked with charcoal symbols that identify the timber's origin. Old Ren points one out. Sichuan Forestry Guild mark. They've been arguing with Jiangxi guilds for decades about whose timber is sturdier. Historians still argue whether the guild disputes ever turned violent, but I've seen carpenters get into fistfights about wood grain, so I wouldn't be surprised. A raft man sits cross-legged on the log ends, eating breakfast, rice, pickled mustard greens, and what looks suspiciously like yesterday's leftover fish. He gestures with his chopsticks at a swirling eddy. "Don't trust those," he says. "A spirit lives under that one. Likes to tug boats sideways just when you're feeling confident." You nod, deciding confidence is overrated anyway. As you glide farther downstream, the sun climbs, brightening the world. Birds stir in the trees. Raft crews sing rhythmic work chants that echo over the water. The logs themselves gleam golden as though polished. It's peaceful now, so peaceful you almost forget the chaos of the bend. Old Ren stretches, cracking joints that sound like someone stepping on twigs. "See? Easy morning," he says. "The river just wanted to check if we were awake." A younger crewman scoffs. "You were asleep, old Ren." Ren snorts. "Nonsense. My eyes were closed because I was listening very carefully." Joke number 2 lands, dry as driftwood. The rafts begin to spread out, choosing different lines along the river's breadth. Some men wave, others shout for updates on weather, sandbars, or who's still owing who money from card games played 3 villages back. A few press on with a kind of stubborn early morning determination that tells you they've had extra tea. Your barge keeps pace with the central raft until noon's hints begin to warm the air. The river softens its voice, becoming a smooth whisper beneath the hull. The raft boss cups his hands around his mouth and calls, "See you at Willow Spire tonight. Try not to get lost in a straight river, all right?" Old Ren grumbles something unintelligible but waves anyway. The rafts drift into a loose formation behind you, their logs shimmering like the spine of a giant wooden dragon sliding across the water's skin. As they fade slightly into the distance, you feel the journey stretch open ahead of you, spice dealers waiting somewhere downstream, the scent of pepper and star anise drifting your way like an invitation. Your barge hums beneath your feet. The river beckons. The sun climbs higher, its warmth spreading over the river until the mist lifts completely, revealing a broad sweep of shimmering water. The barge beneath you settles into a steady, lazy glide. No frantic steering, no chaotic bends, just the Yangtze stretching out like a long, unrolled scroll. You lean against the rail, letting the movement lull your thoughts, until a scent curls through the air so abruptly that it snaps you upright. Pepper. Warm, earthy, nose-tingling pepper. And something sweeter, anise. And something funkier, cloves that have made questionable life choices. Old Ren sniffs dramatically. Ah. Spice dealers. They wake earlier than roosters and gossip louder than monkeys. He points ahead, where faint shapes dot the river like tiny floating islands. As you draw closer, the shapes resolve into a cluster of small sampan boats lashed together by pole, rope, and sheer optimism. Their canopies are draped with faded awnings, and each one is piled high with baskets, jars, crates, and bundles. Spices stacked in a carefully chaotic mosaic that looks like an art installation built by someone allergic to minimalism. Your barge slows, guided by gentle pole pushes from the crew. The spice flotilla hums with activity. A woman with her hair wrapped in a patterned scarf fans a brazier to toast peppercorns. A man with a gap-toothed grin shakes star anise in a sieve. A teen sits cross-legged on a crate, grinding something with intense, suspicious enthusiasm. The moment your hull bumps theirs, voices rise in greeting. Good morning, drifting friends. New faces. New pockets to empty. Try the cinnamon. I swear it cures melancholy, heartbreak, and boring conversations. Joke number 1 of the section practically smacks you on the shoulder with its enthusiasm. You step closer as old Wren exchanges bows with the flotilla's matron, an elderly woman named Auntie Bai. Her eyes sparkle with mischief, and her sleeves are dusted with spice powder so thoroughly that she looks like she sneezed her way through a pantry explosion. She peers at you. First time? She asks. You nod. She grins as though she's just discovered a brand new flavor. Good. Fresh noses judge best. She opens a jar beneath your face. A wave of Sichuan pepper hits you, tingly, electric, buzzing like tiny invisible bees doing cartwheels on your tongue, even though you haven't tasted anything yet. Harvest from upriver, she says. Even the imperial kitchens paid extra for that tingle. That's your mainstream historical fact. Ming-Era courts prized Sichuan pepper and imported spices, with records showing entire shipments earmarked for palace kitchens. Auntie Bai moves to the next jar. Now smell this. You lean in. Regret is immediate. Whatever was inside spent at least 3 months sitting in the hull of a boat that believed in character building through hardship. Your eyes water. You cough. She cackles. Fermented cloves. An acquired taste. Mostly acquired by people who've lost their sense of smell. As you regain composure, you notice small clay pots arranged neatly along the sampan's edge. Each contains a blend of herbs and spices. Labels are scratched in charcoal: fire noodles, dragon breath mix, good luck in exams, tempting, and one simply labeled probably safe. A young dealer waves you over. He offers a pinch of powdered ginger to smell. Fresh from Yunnan, he says proudly. Hot enough to wake the ancestors. Then he leans closer. Historians still argue whether we spice traders exaggerated our product's medicinal properties, but trust me, if you have a cold, this stuff will inspire you to sweat it out of pure fear. You try not to sneeze. You fail quietly. While the dealers show off their wares, the barge crew begins haggling. The negotiations unfold like a dramatic opera, hands waving, voices rising and falling, eyebrows doing acrobatics. One crewman insists that last year's pepper was overpriced. Auntie Bai retorts that last year's pepper was a bargain wrapped in a blessing, which sounds inarguable. Another merchant swears his nutmeg can ward off evil spirits, bad luck, and poorly written love letters. You notice a jar decorated with tiny painted cranes. The dealer leans in conspiratorially. That, he says, is river otter musk, used as a spice in exactly one village upstream. Why? Because the elders there once decided it was aromatic. They were wrong, but tradition is tradition. You vow silently never to open that jar. As the haggling continues, you hop onto one of the smaller boats, carefully, because sampans wobble like uncertain toddlers, and watch a woman roast star anise in an iron pan. The air fills with a sweet, warm aroma that wraps around you like a hug. She stirs rhythmically, humming a folk tune about a fox spirit who steals dumplings from careless travelers. She offers you a roasted star anise pod to sniff. It smells like winter festivals, red lanterns, and secretly eating snacks before dinner. Suddenly, a minor commotion erupts at the far end of the flotilla. A barrel tips, rolling toward the river's edge. 3 dealers sprint after it with the urgency of people trying to rescue their entire livelihood from gravity. The barrel teeters, teets, and stops, caught neatly by a young boy who barely reaches your shoulder. He beams as the adults cheer. Old Ren laughs. That boy will be running this whole fleet in 10 years. Auntie Bai tosses the boy a candied ginger cube as reward. He pops it into his mouth and immediately makes a face like he's swallowed a dragon. The entire flotilla bursts out laughing. The sun climbs higher, glinting off bronze scales of fish surfacing near the boats. Wind dances across awnings. A cormorant perched on a pole tilts its head at you, judging your life choices with its sleek, shiny certainty. You wander the narrow planks connecting the boats, feeling the river sway beneath every step. Spices fill your nose: piney fennel, earthy turmeric, warming cinnamon, pungent garlic. For a moment, you feel like you're walking inside the spice vocabulary of an imperial cookbook. Auntie Bai reappears beside you, stuffing a small pouch into your hand. "Traveler's blend," she says. "Help with stomach, spirit, and conversations with grumpy boatmen." She nods at old Ren. Ren hears. "I'm not grumpy. I'm seasoned," he insists. "Like a duck," Bai replies. Joke number 2 glides smoothly into place. Trade winds down as the barge finishes loading. Coins pass hands. Good luck charms are exchanged. Someone insists you take a small dried chili for courage. You're not sure what challenges await, but it feels rude to decline. Before the flotilla drifts apart, you overhear one last debate. 2 dealers arguing passionately about whether nutmeg came to China via Arab traders first or through overland caravans. Historians still argue. One cries dramatically, "Yes, but I argue louder," the other retorts. You applaud internally. Finally, old Ren calls you aboard. The barge eases away, leaving the spice boats bobbing cheerfully behind you like bright petals scattered across the river. The scent lingers long after the flotilla disappears into the sun's shimmer. Pepper, anise, ginger, cloves, all swirling around you like the memory of a bustling market carried on the wind. Ahead, the river narrows again, and distant silhouettes hint at a cluster of heavy, broad-hulled salt junks waiting stubbornly in the bottleneck. You breathe deep, savoring the fading spices. The journey continues. The river narrows into a long, gentle funnel, the banks rising steeply on either side like the Yangtze has decided to become a polite hallway. The morning sun brightens the world to a warm gold, but the mood on your barge tightens as old Ren squints ahead and mutters, "Salt junks. Always blocking the way like stubborn geese." You lean forward and soon spot them, broad-bellied boats with high prows and square sails, clustered in the tight passage as if someone pressed pause on a very chaotic board game. Their hulls are painted in flaking creams and reds, and each carries massive sacks of salt stacked so high they make the boats look like floating dunes. The air changes as you drift closer. The scent of river water mixes with the crisp, mineral tang of brine. It's sharp enough to sting your nose, making you think of preserved vegetables, winter stores, and the one time you used too much salt in instant noodles and pretended it was fine. Your barge slows, and old Ren calls out, "Make room. Coming through." A nearby salt junk responds with an unhurried, "In a moment." The same tone people use when they're clearly not moving anytime soon. A man standing on the prow of a salt junk waves his arms. "Traffic is backed up," he shouts. "Blame the boat ahead." From farther up the line, a woman yells, "It's not me. It's the one ahead of me." And somewhere beyond that, the river spirit is testing us. The whole bottleneck feels like a floating version of rush hour traffic. If rush hour involved sacks of salt large enough to flatten you and sailors yelling good-natured insults. Old Ren sighs. Every season. Same jam. The youngest crewman adds, "Historians still argue whether salt taxes improved trade or slowed it to the pace of a sleepy snail, but I say, this." He gestures at the mess theatrically. You nod. It's compelling evidence. Your barge edges toward a gap between two junks. You could swear both boats shift deliberately to close the gap at the last second, like bouncers guarding a very exclusive doorway. The sailors grin down at you, obviously enjoying themselves. One of them, a wiry man with a braided queue and a grin too wide to be legal, calls down, "New face. Want to trade for salt?" Old Ren snorts. "We don't need salt." "No one needs salt," the man agrees. "Salt demands you." That's joke number 1 for this section, arriving with the confidence of someone who tells it every day. A skinny teenage sailor perched on a sack of salt waves eagerly. "Smell this," he calls, tossing you a small cloth pouch. You catch it, open it, and inhale, and instantly regret your life choices. The scent is pure, undiluted salt, so sharp it feels like your brain is being exfoliated. The teen beams proudly. Fresh from coastal pans. Dried under 2 suns. You blink. 2. He winks. Hours and the reflection on the water. You give him points for creativity. In truth, here comes your mainstream historical fact. Salt was one of the most tightly regulated commodities in Ming China. The empire ran massive government-controlled salt works, employing thousands in coastal and inland production zones. Transporting this precious, taxable resource meant navigating both geography and bureaucracy, and these junks you're staring at are floating proof of that system. As your barge waits for the jam to loosen, you notice something odd about one salt junk. Its hull is painted with a bright blue carp wearing what looks like a scholar's hat. The carp's face is stern, as though it's scolding you for not appreciating its artistic value. A sailor sees you staring and grins. "Ah, our mascot, Master Carp, protector of cargo." He taps the painted fish with affection. "We had a plain hull last year. Boat scraped twice on rocks. Then my uncle painted Master Carp. 0 scrapes since." Historians still argue whether that's luck or coincidence, someone on his crew calls. "Historians can argue," the sailor replies. But Master Carp does not argue. He protects. A scholarly carp superstition, casually delivered. The jam begins shifting slowly, very slowly. You've seen glacier commit to movement with more enthusiasm. Then a loud thud echoes ahead. Everyone freezes. A shout follows, "Sack overboard." Another voice responds, "Whose sack?" "Yours." "My sack?" "No, your sack." The argument spirals instantly into operatic territory. You peer ahead to see a large sack bobbing helplessly downstream, turning end over end like a beached whale that gave up. Sailors scramble to hook it with poles, shouting contradictory instructions. "Left. Left. That's the wrong left." Whose pole is shorter than it should be? Don't blame the pole, blame the man. Old Ren watches the chaos fondly. "Salt folk," he says. "Best people on the river. Worst planners." Your barge hugs the left bank, drifting past the floating sack rescue squad. One sailor manages to snag the sack with his hook, but the sudden weight nearly yanks him off the deck. 2 more sailors grab him by the ankles, creating a human daisy chain of questionable stability. For a breathless second, it looks like the entire chain will topple into the river. But somehow, through luck, teamwork, or the intervention of Master Carp, they drag the sack aboard and collapse in a triumphant heap. The flotilla bursts into applause. Finally, the boat causing the hold-up inches forward. Your barge takes the opportunity to slide past, and you find yourself between towering walls of salt sacks. They smell clean and mineral-rich, like ancient seawater trapped in fabric. A woman on a nearby junk holds up a handful of coarse crystals. "Ground this morning," she says proudly. "Good for cooking, preserving fish, and scaring off spirits that don't appreciate flavor. Old Wren perks up. Free sample. She laughs. You? Always. She tosses him a tiny pouch. He sniffs it. Smells like 2 months of meals and 1 week of regret. You're not sure what that means, but it feels deeply true. Joke number 3 fits in neatly. As you near the end of the bottleneck, the river widens again. The junks separate, each turning toward its own destination. Some head east toward larger cities. Others drift south toward distribution points. Sailors wave farewells, shouting blessings and warnings in equal measure. Safe travels. Watch for sandbars. Don't trust eels that swim sideways. You still owe me tea money. Old Wren pretends not to hear that last one. Your barge presses forward into calmer waters. The air grows lighter. The salty tang fades, replaced by the earthy scent of riverside tea bushes as the landscape shifts from steep banks to rolling hills. Ahead, faint figures dance on the shoreline, tea porters with bamboo baskets slung across their backs, waiting to ferry their fragrant cargo to the boats. You exhale slowly, letting the bottleneck behind you loosen its grip on your nerves. The river unspools ahead, wide and ready, and your journey quietly flows into its next chapter. You keep drifting with the same sleepy momentum that carried you past the salt junks, your breath sinking with the steady slap of water under the hull. The river widens just slightly, enough for the morning haze to spill across it like someone smudged the world with a soft sleeve. And before you even register their presence, you hear them, the soft clink of bamboo baskets, the rustle of woven straps, and the faint, unmistakable perfume of tea leaves warmed by the sun. Tea porters. They appear first as silhouettes, lean figures stepping onto a low, flat boat painted in muted greens that once probably looked bright but have long since faded under the Ming sun. You drift closer, almost bumping rails because, truly, steering before breakfast is overrated. One porter waves you off with a grin that says, "You're adorable, but please don't crush our livelihood," and you shift just enough to avoid tragedy. Their cargo rises in tidy bundles, each wrapped in oil paper, lacquered leaves, or tough bamboo weave. The scent that escapes when one porter adjusts his stack is enough to jolt your senses awake, earthy, grassy, with a hint of sweet smoke. This is tea straight from the hills, unhurried. Maybe even farther west if the traders got especially ambitious this season. One mainstream historical fact slips naturally into the mix. Tea tax revenues under the Ming dynasty were notoriously high, often regulated to the last leaf's worth of weight. The porters mention it casually, the way modern folks might mutter about parking tickets, just part of the hassle of existing. You watch as they readjust shoulder straps and settle their bundles with practiced ease. Each movement is efficient, quiet, almost graceful. Tea may be light in a cup, but in bulk it weighs down even the strongest backs. One porter, a wiry man with sun-charred cheeks, tells you that they carried these same bundles for half a day through the mountain paths before loading them onto this boat. You nod, mentally sending your respect, and maybe a small apology for ever complaining about carrying grocery bags up a single flight of stairs. Another porter sits near the stern, repairing a frayed strap with nimble fingers. He glances up at you and whispers. Some porters swear that wrapping tea in bamboo fiber keeps bad river spirits from getting too nosy. You're not sure whether he believes this or is just gauging how gullible you are before making the tale even wilder. Hard to tell. His wink suggests he's willing to do both. Your barge drifts parallel to theirs, close enough for conversation but not close enough to mix cargo by accident. Tea traders are friendly, yes, but they'll absolutely glare at you if you knock anything into the river. You settle on a crate and let the sunrise wash over you both. The light catches the bundles and turns them golden, like tiny treasure chests waiting for lucky hands. The porters begin preparing breakfast, steamed buns, dried fish, and a little pot of tea, of course, because branding matters. You accept a cup, the warmth radiating through your palms. The flavor is delicate, grassy, a little nutty. You try not to gulp it all at once like some uncivilized barbarian, but who are you kidding? You do anyway. The porter only smirks. As they sip and talk, the conversation turns to rumors drifting along the river. Bandits in the foothills, tax collectors with suspiciously large sleeves, you can guess why, and whispers that a certain high-ranking official in Nanjing got caught hoarding tribute tea meant for the imperial court. Historians still argue whether, one porter says with a mischievous grin, that old scandal was truly about tea corruption, or whether someone invented the whole story just to explain why the emperor wasn't sleeping well. You laugh. The Ming court did love its drama. The hills loom faintly behind you, and with them, memories the porters carry like quiet burdens. One tells you about the village they came from, how tea bushes cling to slopes so steep goats need a motivational speech to climb them. Another jokes that the emperor should personally carry one tea bundle up and down a mountain before setting taxes, a comment he quickly follows with a nervous glance skyward. The sky remains mercifully silent. No imperial wrath descends. You relax. The boats float past a narrow tributary where the water darkens and the current picks up, swirling with a playful, if slightly menacing, energy. A young porter points to it and warns you not to follow it unless you enjoy getting lost for days. A labyrinth of streams, he adds. Some lead to hidden hamlets, others to dead ends full of reeds and biting insects. And at least one, he says with a totally unnecessary dramatic pause, has a goose that will chase you for miles if it sees you. You laugh, but he leans close. I'm not joking. You believe him. Anyone who sounds that traumatized by a bird is telling the truth. As the morning warms, the river thickens with traffic, grain barges, fishing skiffs, a ceremonial craft carrying what looks like an oversized drum. The tea porters slip easily among them, guiding their small vessel with foot nudges and paddle taps that look casual but are anything but. You try mimicking one pilot's effortless balancing act only to nearly topple over. He snorts and says, "Maybe stick to sitting." Fair enough. Another mainstream fact drifts into the conversation. Tea was such a critical commodity in the Ming-Era that whole regional economies hinged on trade routes like this one along the Yangtze. The porters talk about buyers waiting in river towns, about how the best leaves are snapped up instantly by wealthier families while the rest scatter downstream to common markets. They mention fires in tea barns, floods washing out hillside terraces, and that one year when a freak cold snap stunted the leaves so badly people resorted to brewing pine needles. Not recommended, one says. Tastes like licking an evergreen. You file that away as a mental note never to lick an evergreen. As the sun climbs, the porters shift into work mode again. They hoist bundles, check knots, and prepare for the next trading town just beyond a bend. Their voices soften with concentration. The easy morning banter fades into purposeful silence. Your barge glides beside them like a loyal companion. Before they drift ahead, one porter lowers his voice to share a final rumor. Somewhere upriver, a tea master is experimenting with fermenting leaves in clay pits to create a new kind of brick tea, stronger, denser, longer lasting. Historians still argue whether, he adds with a sly look, that method was a stroke of genius or just someone forgetting their tea underground. You decide not to judge. Your paths begin to separate naturally, the way river journeys always do. Their boat nudges toward a bustling dock while yours drifts forward, carried by a lazy but determined current. You lift a hand in farewell. They return the gesture, raising their steaming cups. And just like that, the tea porters fade into the river morning, leaving behind only the echo of laughter, the smell of warm leaves, and the faint tug of caffeine urging you awake for whatever comes next. You drift onward, letting the faint afterscent of tea fade from your clothes as the current pulls you into a stretch of the Yangtze where the banks tighten once more. The river feels hushed here, not threatening exactly, just contemplative, like it's giving you a chance to gather your thoughts before the next bout of chaos. And you don't have to wait long for that. The first clue is the metallic clang. Then another. Then three in rapid succession, like someone juggling frying pans very aggressively just out of sight. As you round a slow bend, the source reveals itself. A riverbank workshop sprawled across the shallows, half on land, half balanced on wooden stilts that absolutely look like they've never passed a safety inspection. Welcome to the world of Ming-Era boatwrights and bellmakers, a combination you didn't expect, but clearly the universe has decided you're ready. Two enormous bronze bells hang from a horizontal beam like sleepy giants waiting to be woken. Their surfaces are etched with curling patterns, dragons, clouds, and maybe a fish or two, though one artisan nearby swears the third animal is actually a turtle, and honestly, who are you to argue with someone holding a hammer the size of a toddler? A boatwright waves at you to bring your craft closer. His hair sticks out in angles that say he's been up since before dawn, and he stands ankle-deep in the water beside a half-dismantled junk. The hull has been scraped open, chunks of rotten planks stacked like rejected puzzle pieces. Without ceremony, he tosses you a wooden mallet. It nearly knocks you into the river. "Hold that," he says. You do, because the alternative is dropping it and feeling like a disappointment to centuries of imaginary river ancestors. A few apprentices huddle around a smaller bell, heating it with charcoal braziers. You watch the flames lick the bronze, turning it a molten gold before cooling into a deeper, richer brown. One artisan mutters a mainstream historical fact as he works, not even looking up. Many Ming River temples ordered bells like these to protect boatmen, believing their resonance could calm waters or ward off storms. He shrugs. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the river has opinions. You edge closer as another craftsman tests a fresh bell with a wooden striker. The note rings out so clean and long that your bones vibrate. You swear your inner ear rearranges itself. A passing fisherman jolts as if someone whispered taxes into his soul. The craftsman beams. Perfect pitch. On the far side of the workshop, a group of boatwrights crouch around a bucket of pitch, arguing in increasingly theatrical whispers about river taxes. You catch fragments. If the officials want to measure boat length, they should start at the bow. No, the stern. Everyone knows the stern is spiritual. It's only spiritual when you owe money. The debate builds, hands waving, eyebrows wiggling, until one elder boatwright raises a flat palm and declares, "Historians still argue whether the newest tax reform even applies to boats under 10 kai." Everyone goes silent, contemplating this. Then someone sighs, "We should have become fishermen," and the group erupts in soft laughter. Behind them, a young apprentice is gently brushing crocodile oil onto the hull as a sealant. He swears, absolutely swears, that boat makers upriver used to mix crocodile dung into the coating for extra durability. You stare at him, waiting for a grin. He doesn't give one. Does that mean he's serious? Or is he just very, very committed to the bit? You don't ask. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. One of the artisans beckons you over to a set of wooden planks freshly steamed over a curved frame. "We're bending these for a new river courier boat," he explains. The steam rising around you makes everything feel dreamlike, and honestly, you'd believe it if someone claimed this was a portable sauna for ghosts. He taps the plank, listening for something only his years of experience can detect. "Hear that?" he asks. You do not. You nod anyway. He accepts this. Work continues with a choreographed rhythm. Scraping, sanding, heating, cooling, hammering, attaching, muttering, occasionally yelling at an apprentice who is definitely responsible for that mysterious wet footprint on the lacquered board. A bellmaker asks you to steady a mold while he pours molten bronze into it. You back away so dramatically that 3 workers laugh and one claps your shoulder. "Wise choice," he says. A cart creaks up the bank, loaded with clay molds and scrap metal. The woman driving it hops off and immediately begins negotiating with the workshop foreman. You admire her volume and precision. She argues with the same intensity someone today might reserve for a heated review of phone charges. Eventually a deal is struck, sealed with 2 handshakes and a mutual eye roll at the tax situation. The boatwright repairing the junk calls you back over. "Want to help?" he asks. You absolutely do not want to help. He hands you a pitch brush anyway. You dab carefully, maybe too carefully, because he chuckles and says, "It's a boat, not a painting of a boat." Fair point. Nearby, a bellmaker sharpens his tools on a flat stone. Sparks jump in tiny arcs, briefly reflecting off the river's surface like fireflies trying out modern choreography. He tells you about an old temple upriver rumored to have a bell so big it needed 30 people to ring it. Historians still argue whether it ever existed, he adds. But people swear the sound used to travel for miles. He leans closer. If it didn't exist, it should have. You stay with the workshop longer than you expect. Time passes in ringing tones, flying sparks, and the scent of heated resin. Boats arrive, boats leave, some newly repaired, some freshly dented, because apparently river travel is just bumper cars but wetter. Eventually your barge begins to drift free, carried gently by the current tugging at its stone rope. You wave to the artisans, who wave back in a surprisingly coordinated fashion. Clearly years of synchronizing hammer swings has side effects. One of them holds up the mallet you never returned. You pretend not to notice. He pretends to believe you didn't notice. It works out. As the workshop fades behind you, the ringing of bronze bells lingers in your ears, long after the structures shrink to tiny wooden smudges on the riverbank. The sound blends with the river's pulse, a steady undercurrent guiding you toward whatever the Yangtze decides to throw at you next. You drift into the afternoon warmth with that lingering bell hum vibrating in your chest, a soft metallic ghost that echoes each time your barge bumps over a small current. The workshop has faded behind you, replaced by wide, placid water and low-hanging clouds that seem to nap on the horizon. The river air grows thicker, wetter, as if it's bracing itself for something. And then you see them. Porcelain junks. They appear slowly, first as pale shapes against the dimming sky, then as full silhouettes lined up in a delicate procession. Their hulls are painted in faded blues and soft creams, some decorated with brush motifs that cling stubbornly despite years of sun and spray. You recognize the cautious manner in which they travel, slow, steady, tiptoe-like. These traders handle some of the most fragile cargo on the Yangtze, and judging by the grim expressions on a few captains' faces, at least half of them are expecting the river to personally betray them at any moment. You steer closer, careful not to create a wake that might doom several crates of glazed beauty. The nearest junk's deck is stacked with straw-wrapped parcels, some bound with rope so taut it could probably restrain a small dragon. One sailor, seeing your wary look, pats a bundle with reverence. "Porcelain from Yangtze," he says. "The good stuff. The kind nobles argue over." He glances left and right, then adds in a whisper, "And the kind that shatters if you even look at it wrong." A mainstream historical fact slips in naturally. Yangtze was the heart of imperial porcelain production during the Ming dynasty, turning out everything from delicate cups to massive decorative vases, all fired at temperatures that would make your oven cry. These traders ferry it westward and eastward alike, serving markets, collectors, and the occasional scholar who absolutely insists he can carry a vase home himself. He cannot. As you float alongside, The air thickens with a soft, powdery scent, something like clay after rain, mingled with the faint tang of kill smoke absorbed into the crates. Rain clouds gather overhead with suspicious timing, as if testing the traders' collective patience. One sailor squints at the sky. "If it pours," he mutters, "cover everything." Another sailor shoots back, "No, really? And here I thought we'd lay it all out for a cleansing ceremony." River humor, dry as driftwood, sharp as a cracked shard. A drizzle begins, soft at first. The transformation is immediate. Sailors scramble like startled cranes, racing to pull canvas sheets over the cargo. One barks orders that sound suspiciously like threats toward the weather itself. You help untangle a rope, nearly tripping over a crate labeled with a brush symbol that probably means something like "handle with every ounce of human caution you possess." The sailors thank you with a nod and an expression that says, "Please don't touch anything else," though. The rain strengthens. You catch glimpses of how precarious life is for porcelain traders. The deck slickens, the river chops lightly, and every jolt becomes a potential disaster. A sailor tells you about the time a single loose crate cost a wealthy patron more silver than your barge is worth. Historians still argue whether, he adds with a smirk, that customer really fainted or if he just lay down dramatically for effect. You can't decide which option sounds more believable. Under a canvas tent mid-deck, you meet a potter merchant, a wiry, quiet man with clay still stuck under his nails. He's not just a trader, he helped fire some of these pieces. He opens a crate to show you one, a bowl glazed in gentle celadon, smooth as river stones. You reach out, then pause, unsure if your hands are worthy. He lifts it for you instead, letting you admire the translucent quality, the way the glaze seems to glow even in shadow. "We chase perfection," he murmurs. "The kilns don't always agree." As he continues, some potters believed the best firing results came when kilns were blessed with the laughter of children. "Brings balance to the flames," he says. Or so the old masters claimed. He gestures around at the tense, tired sailors. Not much laughter here, though. Lightning flickers far away, too distant to threaten, close enough to make everyone uncomfortable. Sailors begin scanning the crates with almost maternal suspicion, checking for signs of shifting or cracking. One man taps a sealed parcel with the back of his knuckle, listening for something. You're not sure what. Perhaps he's communicating telepathically with the porcelain. If so, it stubbornly refuses to answer. The convoy slows even more, hugging the riverbank where the current is gentler. From up close, you notice tiny red marks painted on a few crates, symbols indicating pieces intended for export, likely to Southeast Asia or beyond. Porcelain flowed outward from China during this era like watery silk, shaping global tastes and confusing foreign collectors who were convinced the designs held secret messages. They sometimes did, but usually the message was this artist was paid too little. You ask one sailor whether they've ever lost a whole shipment. His eyes go wide. "Don't say that," he hisses, as though the river might hear and take it as a suggestion. Then, quieter, only once. "A storm. Boxes everywhere. We called it the blue and white disaster." Another sailor nearby mutters, "Historians still argue whether the river swallowed them or some village fished them up and hosts suspiciously fancy dinners now." When the rain finally weakens, a reluctant sun slips out again. The porcelain junks loosen the coverings, shaking off droplets like sleepy ducks. Spirits lift. Someone brings out a bamboo flute. Someone else tells a joke about a scholar who tried boiling tea in a porcelain vase and accidentally created the world's most elegant mess. The laughter carries over the water, warm and contagious. One sailor invites you to walk across the planks linking two of the junks, and you follow, slowly, carefully, praying that your balance doesn't decide to abandon you now. From this vantage, you see the full convoy, dozens of boats arranged with ceremonial precision, each carrying fragile beauty across a very unfragile river. There's something touching about their stubbornness, their determination to protect every bowl, plate, and tiny teacup. As the light fades, the convoy prepares to anchor near a sheltered inlet for the night. You drift among them, feeling oddly included in their careful ritual, checking knots, adjusting covers, mumbling reassurances to nervous crates as if they can hear. Maybe they can. Stranger things have happened today. When you finally ease your own barge into place beside theirs, the porcelain traders offer you a warm farewell, a small cup, pale and perfect, pressed gently into your hands. A gift, they say, to remember the river's fragile moods. You cradle it with all 10 fingers, holding your breath as you set it safely beside you. Your journey continues, but now you carry something delicate, something that reminds you the river is not just wild or ancient, but capable of nurturing art so fine it needs an entire convoy to survive. You move on from the porcelain convoy with a little more reverence in your ribcage, treating every ripple like it might be holding a fragile bowl's destiny. The cup they gave you rests beside your knee, padded with an extra cloth you folded 3 times because you've seen what this river can do. As dusk thickens into a velvety indigo, lights begin to glow ahead, soft, warm, wavering like fireflies trying to reenact a lantern festival. Red lanterns, hundreds of them, dangling from mooring poles, strung along riverside beams, bobbing gently from boat rails. The sight is so sudden, so theatrical, that you almost wonder if you've drifted onto a movie set 3 centuries ahead of schedule. But no, this is a Ming-Era silk trading stop, alive and shimmering under its crimson canopy. Your barge glides toward a floating dock wrapped in lantern light, and the atmosphere shifts instantly. Gone is the cautious silence of porcelain transport. Here, sound spills everywhere. Laughter, bargaining, the slurp of broth, the hiss of steam from small kitchen stalls perched on rafts. The river reflects the red glow so completely that it looks like you're sailing on liquid ember. Silk traders lounge on their boats, their cargo stacked in tight, elongated bundles swaddled in oilcloth. The cloth is so artfully wrapped that you can immediately tell this isn't mere rope work. Someone here takes pride in presentation. When one trader leans over and sees your curious look, he flicks open a corner of a bundle with a flourish. A ribbon of silk, deep violet with a faint gold pattern, spills out like it's auditioning for a spotlight. A mainstream historical fact surfaces as naturally as the silk itself. Suzhou and Hangzhou were major hubs of silk production during the Ming-Era, feeding the massive demand for fine cloth across the empire and beyond. Many of the traders here are ferrying bolts from those cities to markets farther upriver, where wealthy families and ambitious merchants snap them up. The trader lets the fabric trail over your hand. It's absurdly smooth, soft in a way that makes your brain question every piece of clothing you've ever worn. He grins. Good, yes. Then he adds, careful. Once you touch silk, you end up wanting to wear it every day. You nod solemnly. This feels like the beginning of a financially irresponsible lifestyle choice. Nearby, a noodle vendor on a raft slings broth bowls to passing sailors with terrifying accuracy. You accept one when he gestures it your way, and instantly the steam fogs your vision. You slurp carefully, knowing full well you're one awkward tilt away from scalding your dignity. The vendor laughs and tells you, some river traders swear eating noodles under red lanterns brings good luck for negotiations. But only if you inhale the broth completely, he says. You don't test that superstition. You enjoy having functioning lungs. You wander across planked walkways set just above the waterline, linking boats and tiny stalls in an improvised marketplace that wobbles with every passing breeze. Silk bundles are everywhere, stacked, draped, hung from beams like lazy banners. The colors glow richly under lantern light: ruby, emerald, lapis, soft gold, sunrise pink. A few traders even hang samples off poles above the water so they catch the faint wind, rippling like river spirits advertising premium fabric. As you drift through the crowd, two merchants argue over dye quality with the passion of poets. One insists that indigo crops this year grew thin after a cold snap. The other claims the cold snap was exaggerated and that the first merchant simply watered down his dye. They go back and forth until a third trader chimes in. Historians still argue whether that cold snap happened at all. The first two glare at him in offended unison. Then they glare at each other again. The cycle continues. A group of junior traders huddle near a pot of broth, whispering about a rumored new embroidery technique from the south that supposedly uses silk threads as fine as spider webs. One of them says a master embroiderer can sew an entire crane onto a sleeve so delicate that when you breathe on it, the wings tremble. Impossible, another argues. Exaggerated. But the first leans closer and murmurs, "I saw it." You can't tell if he's messing with his friends, or you. Red lanterns sway above you with slow, hypnotic grace. Their light softens the world, blurring edges, smoothing colors, turning every trader's face warm and kind, even the ones currently arguing over price buckeye measurements. Each lantern bears its own tiny brush-painted mark, a character for fortune, a simple lotus, a stylized fish. One lantern features a doodle that looks suspiciously like a cat chasing a butterfly. You appreciate the artist's priorities. A musician sits cross-legged on a deck, plucking a peeper. The melody unfurls like smoke, weaving through conversation and steam and the rustle of silk. It relaxes you so deeply that your barge begins drifting away without you noticing. A trader catches your sleeve and tethers your boat with one hand. "Easy," he says. "This place is charming, but it will absolutely steal your attention, and your vessel." He invites you aboard his junk, where a long silk bolt lies half unrolled. Together you admire the pattern, swirling waves lined with tiny silver strokes, each one catching the lantern glow just enough to look alive. He explains that silver thread embroidery was a status symbol, one that required enormous skill and an alarming amount of patience. The slightest mistake could ruin hours of work. "One apprentice tore a bolt last month," he says. "She cried. The master cried. Even the tea kettle sounded sad." The trader pauses to sip broth, watching lantern reflections dance on the river. Then, with a sudden, mischievous lowering of his voice, he tells you a rumor. Somewhere along the Yangtze, a silk guild keeps a secret dye formula that shifts colors depending on moonlight. Blue in shade, crimson in dusk, gold in full sun. Historians still argue whether that guild ever existed, he adds, but every few years a robe shows up with colors no one can name. You try picturing such cloth, and your brain immediately malfunctions from beauty overload. As night deepens, the lantern glow brightens by contrast, turning the whole mooring into a soft red galaxy. Traders begin final deals for the evening, exchanging silver, bolts, promises, and occasionally food. Someone starts a joke competition, which devolves into puns so bad they could destabilize dynasties. You contribute one. It is terrible. They cheer anyway. When you finally pull your barge free from the lantern-lit maze, the red glow trails behind you, rippling across the river like a long silk ribbon drifting in your wake. The night feels dimmer without it, but calmer too, like the river is giving you space to breathe after the sensory feast. You rest your hand on the delicate porcelain cup beside you, its pale surface reflecting a faint, lingering red. And you drift onward, deeper into the Ming night. You drift further along the Yangtze, the light thinning into that soft, late afternoon haze that makes everything look a little more forgiving. almost like the river is applying its own beauty filter to spare you from noticing how exhausted you are. The water quiets, flattening into a bronze sheet broken only by the flick of oars and the occasional splash from a carp that clearly didn't sign up to be a background actor in your scenic journey. You ease back, letting your hands trail in the cool current as your little flotilla approaches a cluster of boats moored together in what looks like a floating marketplace. The gossip of the river is thick in the air, and you realize you've sailed straight into the social hub of Ming-Era commerce. Traders wave lazily from their decks, silk merchants in sun-bleached robes, lacquerware sellers guarding crates like overprotective dragons, fishermen with those big straw hats that make you wonder if they have secret neck-strengthening exercises. You steer closer, careful not to knock into anything fragile because you know your luck. The rhythm of river chatter pulls you in, thin voices drifting across the water, fast, slow, teasing, complaining. A young man leans over the side of his grain barge to warn you that a rival trader is spreading rumors of worm-infested millet. But honestly, the millet looks fine. You file that away under business feuds I didn't ask for but am apparently now part of. You tie your boat to a weathered piling, step onto a broad platform raft, and instantly feel the social temperature rise. Conversations ripple around you. Talk of rumors, fortunes, storms, questionable business techniques, and someone's aunt who apparently swears she saw a river dragon last week. Historians still argue whether these dragon tales were symbolic exaggerations, or just the imaginative result of long hours on the water with limited snacks. Either way, you decide not to judge. You'd hallucinate a dragon too if you missed lunch. A group of traders sits in a loose ring around a bundle of crates, sipping weak rice wine that smells like vinegar with ambition. One motions for you to join. You lower yourself into the circle and instantly become aware that everyone here knows everyone else, and everyone else's business. You're the stranger, which means they're already guessing your life story. Relax. Just pretend you're mysterious and skilled instead of sleep-deprived and hoping for snacks. A cloth merchant with a voice like gravel asks where you're headed. You tell him you're drifting southward with the grain fleet. He nods, then launches into a casual monologue about bandit sightings upriver, mixed with a humble brag about the time he negotiated a silk price down by exactly 23%, which he repeats twice, making sure everyone counts the percent with him. It's a mainstream historical fact that river traders often shared news about dangers, weather patterns, and market prices. The Yangtze served as a literal information highway long before smartphones or that one uncle's conspiracy-filled group chat existed. This floating forum functioned like a medieval LinkedIn, minus the humble brag job posts. Or, well, actually, maybe not minus. But the real intrigue in a place like this is the gossip. You overhear a spice dealer explaining that a rival's famous rare cinnamon is actually bark from a totally ordinary local tree. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry at how offended she is. Another boatman mutters about a tax collector who drinks more than he tallies, and someone else claims that a scholar in Nanjing is writing a scandalous play about corrupt officials, which, if true, is probably the fastest way to get your manuscript seized and your career gently redirected. You lean back, listening, letting the mingled voices wash over you like patches of warm sunlight. At one point, two older traders start an argument about whether the emperor's edicts on river safety will actually reduce collision accidents. Historians still argue whether Ming River regulations were strict enough or mostly symbolic gestures that looked good on paper but sank in practice. You sip your wine and nod solemnly like you're part of this nuance, even though you're mostly wondering why the wine tastes like it was brewed in someone's shoe. As the sun dips lower, the river briefly becomes a mirror, and everyone on the platform grows a little softer. One man takes out a small stringed instrument, nothing fancy, just a traveler's companion, and starts plucking a quiet melody. The music threads through the evening breeze, winding into the water's hum. You might be imagining it, but you swear the river slows down to listen. A woman beside you offers roasted broad beans from a tiny paper twist. You thank her, take one, and nearly burn your tongue because they are somehow lava temperature, but you play it cool to maintain your aura of river-hardened competence. She laughs quietly anyway. Turns out she sells medicinal herbs and claims she once treated a merchant who got sick from eating improperly stored dried shrimp. She asks whether you've seen the floating storyteller yet. You shake your head. She points to a small boat drifting toward the gathering, lanterns glowing amber. Standing at its prow is a tall figure in loud blue robes, face lit like a candle in a paper window. The storyteller moves with the practiced ease of someone who knows exactly how dramatic their silhouette looks. As he glides near, he begins reciting a tale without preamble, a legend about a ferryman who ferried ghosts across the river at night, unaware until the final trip when one thanked him for the ride and dissolved into moonlight. You feel a shiver crawl up your spine, partly from the story and partly because you're pretty sure someone behind you whispered, "I heard that really happened." The gathering hushes as the storyteller continues, weaving river myths with real dangers and cautionary lessons. Stories like his were a crucial entertainment and cultural glue among traders who spent months isolated on the water. They carried news, shaped superstitions, and occasionally served as subtle warnings about greed, betrayal, or risky boating maneuvers. You let yourself sink into the narrative, drifting right alongside its rhythm. By the time he ends, the lanterns bob gently, casting gold ripples on the water. The traders applaud softly, the kind of applause people give when they are relaxed, fed, and maybe a little buzzed. You realize it's time to move on, not because anyone says so, but because the river is calling again, nudging you downstream. You thank the circle, untie your boat, and push off into the mellow glow. Laughter trails behind you. Someone shouts a final warning about counterfeit tea bricks. You add that to your growing list of things I will absolutely forget until they become dangerously relevant. The river widens, ready for whatever comes next. You lean forward, letting the current catch you, carrying with you the warmth of human voices, shared stories, and the soft truth that even in the vastness of the Yangtze, no one travels entirely alone. Night has fully arrived by the time you drift back into the current, and the Yangtze settles into that deep, velvety quiet that somehow manages to be both peaceful and slightly unnerving, like the river is whispering, "Sure, relax, but keep one eye open just in case." Lantern glow shivers across the surface as nearby boats cast their light in long, trembling streaks. You pull your cloak around your shoulders, pretending it helps even though it's basically the thickness of a determined napkin. Still, it gives you an air of contemplative river mystic, which is honestly a pretty solid look on you. You glide into a mooring channel beside a cluster of anchored grain junks preparing for an overnight layover. The captains have arranged their vessels in a staggered arc, creating a kind of floating courtyard. Men squat on their decks, oiling ropes, wiping down oars, and muttering complaints that definitely count as a universal human constant. Even in the Ming dynasty, someone was always grumbling about the night shift. You tie your boat next to a grain barge whose hull looks like it has survived several lifetimes of questionable decisions. The night watchman nods at you, lantern in hand. He looks half asleep already, so you give him an encouraging thumbs up as if to say, "You're doing great, buddy." He blinks slowly, which you decide to interpret as gratitude rather than confusion. A pot of millet porridge is bubbling over a tiny stove on the central raft. You follow the smell like a cartoon character floating toward a pie on a windowsill. A group of sailors is gathered around the pot, laughing as one of them tells a story about a chicken that escaped on board last week and caused absolute maritime chaos. Apparently it ran across sacks, flapped into someone's face, and at one point perched triumphantly on the captain's hat. You accept a wooden bowl of porridge, the warmth spreading through your hands in a way that makes your whole body sigh. The grains are soft and slightly sweet. A sailor nudges you, pointing at a nearby boat where several crew members are polishing large wooden paddles with sesame oil. He whispers that the upcoming river bend is notorious for strong crosswinds, and they'll need every bit of grip they can get. It's a mainstream historical fact that many sections of the Yangtze were known for unpredictable gusts, the kind that could flip a careless boat faster than you can say, "I thought this trip was supposed to be relaxing." While you eat, a pair of younger deckhands argue good-naturedly over whether the imperial granaries in Nanjing are actually as enormous as travelers claim. One insists he heard they can hold a year's worth of grain for half the province. The other rolls his eyes and says that's just bragging from bureaucrats who want their storage units to sound impressive. Historians still argue whether the Ming grain transport system was genuinely as efficient as the official documents claim, or if those records were, let's say, optimistically edited. You decide to stay out of the debate before someone asks for your opinion, because you're just here for the porridge. As the night deepens, the boats settle into a collective stillness. The only sounds are the creaking of hulls and the rhythmic slap of water against wood. It feels like the river is breathing slowly beneath you. You stretch out on your deck, stare up at the soft bloom of stars, and let your mind wander. A gentle breeze tickles across your face, carrying hints of pine from the distant hills. Your eyelids grow heavy, and for a moment you consider drifting off right there. But then the night crew begins their patrol, and your deck shifts as someone steps aboard your boat to check your mooring knots. You jolt upright, mildly offended that they would interrupt your almost nap, but the sailor just nods politely and moves on. You overhear him telling a colleague that last week, a trader tied his boat with a knot so poorly made that the vessel drifted away and had to be rescued from a sandbar by a very displeased official. You silently check your own knot. It's fine. Probably. A lantern sways overhead as one of the senior captains approaches. He sits beside you with the deliberate slowness of someone whose knees have filed multiple complaints. He asks if this is your first long voyage. You admit it is. He chuckles and says you're handling it far better than some apprentices he's seen. One of them once tried to anchor on the wrong side of the boat entirely. You laugh, even though you're not completely sure you wouldn't make that exact mistake under pressure. He tells you that many of the grain junks on the river follow the same routes year after year, guided by winds, currents, and generations of inherited knowledge. Some families have been river navigators for so long that their techniques are practically secret traditions. One clan, he says, even uses coded whistles to communicate across foggy waters. You're not sure if he's joking or not, but he delivers the line with a straight face, so you just nod like you totally understand advanced whistle speak. The captain's voice softens as he points toward the silhouette of a cliff in the distance. On its face, faint even in moonlight, are ancient carvings, stone scripts and guardian figures left by earlier dynasties. He explains that many river travelers believed these carvings offered protection from storms or spirits. Some even left offerings tucked into crevices, hoping for safe passage. You look at the carvings glimmering faintly like old memories etched into bone. Eventually, the captain rises, bids you good night, and returns to his vessel. You lie back again, letting the hum of the night settle around you. The boats sway together like a slow heartbeat. Somewhere, a rope groans, and someone snores in a rhythmic pattern that would honestly make a catchy percussion loop. You finally slip into a gentle half-doze, your body sinking into the cradle of the boat, your mind drifting just above sleep, when a splash nearby jolts you awake. You bolt upright, eyes wide, only to see a fish leap and arc through the air like it's auditioning for a river-themed circus. You exhale. The river is not trying to kill you. Not tonight, anyway. You pull your cloak tighter, nestle into your corner of the deck, and let the motion of the water lull you once more. Around you, the anchored boats breathe in unison, a little floating village wrapped in moonlight and grain dust. Tomorrow will bring new bends, new winds, new voices. But for now, the night holds you gently in its shimmering hands. The river murmurs. Lanterns flicker. You drift into sleep. You wake to the faint thump of someone dropping a coil of rope, followed by an exasperated whisper that makes it very clear this was not part of the morning plan. The sky is still dim blue, that delicate pre-dawn color that looks like the world is holding its breath. The river air is cool and damp, brushing your cheeks with the same gentleness as someone tapping your shoulder to say, "Hey, you might want to get moving because today's going to be chaos." The grain fleet is already stirring. Men shuffle across decks, rubbing sleep from their eyes, stretching shoulders that have carried cargo loads since before sunrise was fashionable. The smell of rice gruel and fried dough twists wafts from a cooking raft, and you head in that direction purely out of self-preservation. You grab a warm dough twist and try not to burn your fingers, though your attempt at subtle finger shaking absolutely gives you away. Today's challenge reveals itself as soon as you push off. Fog. Not soft, poetic, river in a painting fog. No, this is the kind of fog that looks like the world misplaced its textures and forgot where it left them. It rolls across the surface in thick, damp folds, swallowing the banks, the boats, and any remaining hope that you'll look confident while navigating. You glide forward slowly, squinting so hard you probably look like you're trying to read the tiny print on a Ming tax receipt. The water slaps gently at your hull, and your ears sharpen, catching every creak of wood and every distant splash. A boatman's voice calls out through the mist, warning others to keep a safe distance. You follow the sound like a lighthouse that's slightly annoyed at having to be a lighthouse before sunrise. A larger junk passes close enough that you feel its wake nudge your boat, and a sailor up top shouts, "Stay to the right," which is helpful, except right now you're not entirely sure where right is. You make a strategic choice, drift very cautiously and pretend this was your plan all along. Fog navigation was part of real Ming River life. It's a mainstream historical fact that vessels often used drum signals, conch calls, or coordinated shouting to maintain formation when visibility dropped. Sure enough, a series of thuds echo across the water, someone beating a steady rhythm on a wooden drum. You adjust your paddle strokes to stay in sync. Off your left, a faint silhouette appears, then resolves into a boat tethered to a floating shrine. Its guardian lantern flickers in and out, haloed in haze like something out of a bedtime story meant to inspire both comfort and mild fear. A pair of monks in simple robes stand aboard, ringing a bronze bell to bless the passing fleet. The sound rolls through the fog like warm honey, making the hair on your arms lift. One monk raises his hand in greeting. You return the gesture, hoping they don't notice how cold your fingers are. You drift closer, carefully, and see bundles of incense burning in small clay pots. According to one sailor near you, some shrines on the river are dedicated to old water deities, forgotten officials, or legendary protectors. He claims one shrine was built to honor a ferryman who once saved an entire convoy from a sudden storm. He also claims that ferryman later became a cloud. Historians still argue whether these shrine stories began as real memorials or simply grew from riverside superstition, another sailor adds, shrugging as if this is all just typical morning conversation. You nod sagely, though you're mostly focused on not drifting face first into the shrine. As the fog thins slightly, you catch glimpses of the riverbank, dark reeds poking into the sky, stones slick with dew, the faint outline of a farmer leading a water buffalo along the embankment. It looks so serene you almost forget how stressful the last 20 minutes were. Almost. Then a quick warning shout rips through the fog, "Snag ahead." You jerk your oar, veering away just in time to avoid a floating log the size of a grumpy crocodile. A nearby deckhand gives you a thumbs up. You respond with a smile that probably reads as "I absolutely meant to do that," which is a lie, but it's too early for honesty. The fog continues to peel back in slow layers, revealing boats emerging like ghosts turning solid. Somewhere, a cormorant fisherman taps the edge of his vessel, signaling his birds to prepare for their morning dive. The soft slap of their wings is almost musical. Even through this misty soup, life goes on. A woman on a narrow sampan paddles up beside you and warns of a shallow shoal just ahead. You thank her, grateful that she appears to have both local knowledge and functioning eyeballs. She explains that the shoal shifts after heavy rains, and some sailors swear it moves on purpose, like it's alive and bored. You snort, quietly, but she doesn't seem offended. In fact, she leans closer and confides that her grandmother said the shoal was formed from the bones of a drowned dragon. Which, okay, you weren't prepared for that mental image before breakfast. By mid-morning, the fog has lifted enough that you can breathe again without worrying you'll inhale a boat. The river widens into a calm expanse, sunlight breaking through in slender gold beams that make everything sparkle just a little too wholesomely. You loosen your shoulders, realizing how tense you've been. You stretch, hear a crack that suggests your spine has opinions, and continue downstream. The currents shift as you near a confluence where a tributary spills in, swirling water into overlapping spirals. Two crews shout back and forth about how to angle their rudders correctly. You try to follow their advice but end up spinning halfway around like a very determined but confused duck. A sailor nearby laughs, not unkindly, and calls out a correction. You follow his lead, straighten yourself out, and offer a small bow of gratitude. He bows back with exaggerated formality, nearly falling into his own cargo sacks. As the river settles again, you fall into an easy rhythm. Paddle, drift, adjust. The sun climbs. Birds trace arcs overhead. Your breathing slows to match the pulse of the water. You feel steady, like the river has accepted you as one of its many moving parts. Ahead, the sound of hammers, shouts, and creaking wood rises. The next stop approaches, another pocket of river life waiting with new stories, new characters, and probably more opportunities to embarrass yourself gracefully. But for now, you glide forward, fog behind you, sunlight warming the world again. By the time you reach the next stretch of river, the sun has climbed high enough to paint everything in that warm, forgiving glow that makes even half-broken boats look noble and aesthetically intentional. The fog is now a fading memory, one you file in the category of things I survived, therefore I am impressive, which is honestly a pretty good category to have. Ahead, a flurry of motion catches your eye, hammers striking wood in a steady rhythm, sawdust drifting like tiny golden fireflies, men shouting measurements that absolutely nobody else seems to follow. You've stumbled into a bustling riverside repair yard, one of the essential pit stops for traders whose vessels have seen a few too many scrapes with rocks, logs, or mysterious river creatures that are definitely just logs but somehow always get blamed. You angle your boat toward the wooden docks, careful not to graze the edges too much. A repairman waves you in, barely glancing up from the plank he's sanding. His hands move with that effortless skill that comes from decades of turning damaged things into useful things again. You hop onto the dock, stretch your legs, and almost trip over a coil of rope. Classic you. A nearby apprentice grabs it out of your path, gives you a shy smile, and continues hauling materials like it's all part of the choreography. The entire repair yard hums like a hive. A massive junk is suspended in a cradle of beams, its hull cracked open like it's undergoing heart surgery. Men swarm around it, applying pitch, replacing boards, arguing about angles, and occasionally making jokes about the owner's questionable steering skills. According to one carpenter, with the theatrical sigh of someone who has seen things, this particular crack happened because the captain insisted the river bend was just a suggestion. You wander deeper into the yard, watching work crews move with coordinated chaos. A man taps a beam with a mallet, listening to the resonance the way a musician tests a drum. Another uses a heated blade to shape bamboo ribs for a smaller craft. Boat building techniques in Ming China really were advanced. It's a mainstream historical fact that some large river junks were constructed using compartmentalized hulls that offered extra stability. You examine a half-built hull and spot the inner bulkheads, short walls spaced like ribs. The apprentice beside you explains that if one chamber floods, the others won't panic, which is an adorable way to phrase structural engineering. Near the back of the yard, a group of older craftsmen sits in the shade of a tree, repairing nets and telling stories in that relaxed cadence of people who have earned the right to take their time. You approach cautiously, because elders always notice when a newcomer is pretending to blend in. One of them motions you closer anyway. His face is lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from both laughter and squinting into the sun. He asks where you're headed, and when you tell him you're drifting downstream with the grain fleet, he nods approvingly. He points to a stack of planks and explains that the wood comes from forests upriver, some of it prized nanmu, known for resisting rot. Perfect for boats, he says. Or coffins. But mostly boats. You appreciate the clarification. He adds that the price of timber fluctuates constantly. Historians still argue whether shortages in certain decades came from overharvesting, war demands, or just bureaucrats misfiling reports. You sip from your water gourd and pretend you definitely already knew that. A shout draws your attention to the shoreline, where two men are hauling in a boat that has clearly had a rough week. The hull is gouged on one side and smeared with a mysterious green stain. The owner leaps ashore dramatically, insisting that he collided with a river monster. The repair crew humors him for exactly 10 seconds before someone mutters, "Looks like algae," and the rest nod in agreement. You watch the owner deflate like a punctured wineskin. Poor guy. You consider patting him on the shoulder but decide against physical contact with someone who still smells like fear and pond sludge. As you wander toward the supply shack, the warm scent of pine tar hits you. Inside, shelves grown with coils of rope, jars of pitch, wooden pegs, metal nails, and tiny tools whose purposes you instantly forget. A young woman behind the counter tallies items with lightning speed. She tells you that each season brings different repair needs. Spring floods cause hull scrapes, summer storms break masts, and autumn brings drifting debris that acts like nature's way of saying, surprise. You buy a small jar of pitch just in case. You don't know how to use it, but it makes you look competent. Outside, a demonstration suddenly begins. Two carpenters teaching apprentices how to reinforce a hull's outer seams. You watch them skillfully press strips of bamboo fiber along the gaps, sealing them with heated resin. One apprentice accidentally brushes resin on his sleeve, yelps, and flaps his arm wildly. You bite your tongue to keep from laughing too hard, mostly because you know you'd be the one doing that on your first day. The river breeze shifts as you stroll toward the water's edge. A half-finished boat rests on rollers, ready to be launched. A team of men begins chanting, a rhythmic, rising call and response that helps them coordinate the push. You instinctively join in, your voice blending with theirs as the boat glides toward the water, picking up speed until it splashes in with a triumphant sweep of spray. Everyone cheers. Even you, though you had no real responsibility in the process other than moral support. A carpenter pats the new hull proudly. Built strong enough to take on 10 river seasons, he says. You tactfully do not ask what the failure rate is for that prediction. The shipwright who waved you in earlier steps over, wiping sawdust from his forearms. He gives your little boat a once-over and raises an eyebrow. You want to tune up? He asks. You shrug, thinking, why not? A little care never hurts. Unlike that time you ignored your creaking paddle and it snapped at the worst possible moment. He and an apprentice grab tools and begin tightening your bindings, sealing tiny cracks with resin, and even adjusting your oarlock so it won't squeak anymore. Honestly, you didn't realize how Yankee your boat had been until you saw it handled by professionals. When they are done, your vessel looks cleaner, sturdier, almost proud. You thank them, slipping a few coins into the shipwright's palm. He waves off part of the payment, saying travelers should help each other on the river. You insist. He insists back. You insist again. It briefly becomes the politest battle in history before you manage to tuck the money into his belt when he's not looking. Before leaving, you walk once more through the vibrant yard, the clang of metal, the thunk of mallets, the earthy smell of timber mingling with river air. The workers laugh, argue, sweat, and build, breathing life into vessels that will soon skim across the Yangtze again. As you push off from the dock, your newly spruced up boat cuts cleanly through the water. The repair yard shrinks behind you, its sounds fading into a distant cadence. The river catches your hull like it recognizes the upgrade, tugging you forward with renewed energy. You settle back, smiling at the thought of all those boats repaired, restored, resurrected, each carrying the stories of the people who built them. Yours now carries a few more as well. The river bends ahead, waiting. The river narrows again as afternoon light settles into that warm, honeyed tone that makes the world look softer, like the Yangtze is trying to lull you into a false sense of security. And honestly, it's working. You lean back, letting your freshly repaired boat hum along the current like it's proud of its makeover. The water glitters in broken shards of gold, reeds sway along the banks, and for a moment you feel like you're gliding through a scroll painting where every brushstroke was designed to calm your pulse. Naturally, that's when the river decides to remind you who's in charge. A low rumble reaches you first, not thunder, but something like a distant crowd shouting. You straighten, shading your eyes. Up ahead, boats drift in a jittery cluster, their captains waving frantically. A fisherman paddles past you, shaking his head and muttering, "Wind change. Bad timing." You want to ask for details, but he's already gone, swallowed by the bends. The current quickens beneath you, subtle, but insistent. Your stomach does that uncomfortable drop it does on roller coasters and during surprise tax audits. You tighten your grip on the paddle, angling your boat carefully. The riverbanks draw closer, steeper, turning from soft slopes into rugged stone walls. The current winds through this funnel like it's in a rush for a very important meeting. You're entering one of the Yangtze's notorious wind corridors. It's a mainstream historical fact that certain sections of the river, especially between gorges or steep banks, acted like giant natural wind tunnels. Gusts could slam into a boat with zero warning, sending sails snapping and helmsmen scrambling. River manuals from the Ming-Era even warned captains to lower pride before sails, which you're pretty sure is both nautical advice and emotional wisdom. A trader on a heavier junk waves at you, shouting, "Lower your profile." You're not entirely sure what part of you is supposed to lower anything, so you crouch instinctively like you're trying to hide from a teacher calling on students who didn't do their homework. Turns out it's perfect timing. A sudden blast of wind hits your boat with enough force to make your lantern sway wildly. Your cloak whips behind you, turning you briefly into a dramatic river superhero, but only briefly, because you instantly duck to avoid being smacked in the face by your own fabric. The chaotic shouts from the boats around you rise. Some crews are hauling down sails before the wind tears them clean off. Others steer hard toward the inside of the bend, where the current isn't as pushy. You try to mimic their movements, only realizing halfway through that your boat responds with the enthusiasm of a sleepy cat. Still, it obeys, mostly. A gust roars across the water, dragging a sheet of spray up and over several decks. You brace yourself, adjusting your course, leaning in with the kind of intensity usually reserved for stealthily opening noisy snack wrappers in a quiet room. To your left, a narrow cliff face rises above the river, carved with ancient inscriptions. The characters are weathered but still visible, a reminder that people have been navigating, cursing, and occasionally flipping along this corridor for centuries. One carved symbol in particular catches your eye. It's shaped like a spiral, and a nearby boatman shouts that locals call it the windmouth mark. According to him, it was carved by a monk who survived being blown clear across the river centuries ago. You're not sure if it's true, and also strangely comforting in a hey, at least you're still in your boatway. The wind hits again, this time from the opposite direction. You grip the paddle, digging deep into the current. Your arms burn pleasantly, then unpleasantly, then in a way that makes you question your entire fitness routine. You mutter encouragement to your poor boat, which honestly seems to be doing its best under pressure. As you push forward, a debate breaks out between two nearby crews. One insists these winds are caused by spirits living in the cliffs. The other argues it's just a natural meeting of pressure systems and temperature shifts. Historians still argue whether river folklore arose from superstition or as a practical teaching tool. One sailor shouts toward you as he ties down a flapping line. But either way, everyone listens to it. His hat blows off mid-sentence. You try not to laugh. You fail. The current begins twisting unpredictably, a dance you're not fully invited to but must participate in anyway. Your boat swings left, then straightens, then swings again as if practicing interpretive river ballet. You navigate with tiny, calculated strokes, watching how the water ripples at the edges. The wind whistles past your ears, bringing with it the tang of wet stone and a faint scent of pine from the distant slopes. Finally, after what feels like 6 hours but is probably more like 20 minutes, the cliffs ease apart. The wind softens into a playful breeze, then calms almost completely. The river widens again, the current smoothing out like a wrinkled sheet finally laid flat. You straighten, stretching your back and fingers, which currently resemble overcooked noodles. Around you, other sailors do the same, laughing, groaning, swapping jokes about how each of their boats handled it better than expected, even though you saw at least 2 people nearly fall overboard. A passing captain raises a hand in salute. "You handled that well," he calls. You are 90% sure he is being polite. You salute back anyway, because confidence is all about bold gestures and zero verification. You drift toward a calmer eddy near the bank, letting the adrenaline drain from your system. Reeds rustle softly. Dragonflies skim lazily across the surface. A water buffalo watches you from shore with unmistakable judgment. You take a long drink from your gourd, sigh, and let your heartbeat slow to something more reasonable. The wind corridor fades behind you, becoming just another bend, another story, one the river has been telling travelers for generations. Ahead lies open water, golden and glassy, inviting you onward. You paddle gently back into the flow, letting the Yangtze gather you up again. Stronger now. Tired. But still drifting forward. Evening begins its slow descent, that late-day hush settling over the Yangtze like a blanket pulled lovingly across a restless child. The river is calm now, eerily so after the chaos of the wind corridor, as though it's pretending nothing dramatic ever happened. You're not fooled, but you're grateful. Your arms, shoulders, and heroic core muscles need the break. Warm amber light spills across the water, turning every ripple into a glowing thread. You paddle lazily, letting the current do most of the work. The air is cool but not cold, filled with that soft mineral scent river stones release after a day of sun. Somewhere far off, a bell echoes, 4 slow chimes, carried across the water with tender precision. A temple must be nearby. Sure enough, as your boat rounds a gentle bend, you catch sight of it. Perched high on a cliff overlooking the river, a modest monastery tucked among cypresses. Its rooftops reflect the dying light, gold flaring faintly before dimming again. Smoke curls from a small incense burner near the outer balcony, drifting down toward the water as though attempting to greet each passing traveler. You're not planning to stop, but the river seems to have other opinions about your itinerary. The current slackens without warning. Your boat glides forward, slows, then drifts sideways until its nose points toward a narrow stone stairway carved into the embankment. You stare at the steps, then at the sky, then at the river. The river, unhelpfully, maintains a dignified silence. A ferryman waiting at the foot of the stairs lifts a hand as if expecting you. Evening traveler. The monks offer warm rice and lodging for those who pass at dusk. Tempting. Very tempting. Especially since your last proper meal was, you do the math, unpleasantly far in the past. But curiosity nudges you harder than your stomach does. Why dusk, you ask? He shrugs. Tradition. Also, he leans closer, lowering his voice. The abbot says the river carries wandering spirits most strongly at night. Travelers should rest on land, not water. A shiver skates across your spine, not out of fear, but because folklore always hits differently when spoken beside a slowly darkening river. He continues without prompting. Records from the Tang and Song dynasties mention monks providing shelter for boatmen and merchants, he explains, sometimes for safety, sometimes for charity. Some monasteries would hang a lantern out to signal safe lodging. He gestures upward. Sure enough, a solitary lantern already glows above the stairway, a tiny, warm beacon pulsing against the cliffside shadows. A guide for the weary, he adds. You glance at the light, then at your boat, then at the ominously patient river. Fine. Message received. You step ashore. The stone stairs climb steeply, because apparently the official pastime of mountain monasteries is calf destruction. Halfway up, you pause to admire the view. The river below glimmers like a ribbon laid across the world, the sun sinking behind distant peaks, painting the water in velvety crimsons and long strokes of lavender. When you finally reach the top, a novice monk greets you with a bow that radiates the calm of someone who has never had to argue with a stubborn river current. He leads you into the courtyard, where a quiet bustle of evening chores unfolds. Monks carrying buckets of water, sweeping leaves, tending tiny garden plots of herbs that smell sweet and sharp. You're offered a wooden stool and a bowl of steaming rice porridge topped with preserved vegetables. You inhale it in a manner that earns you at least 3 amused glances. A pot of tea follows, earthy, fragrant, with a hint of toasted grain. You close your eyes as warmth spreads through your chest. Your body basically applauds. After eating, you wander through the courtyard. Lanterns hang from beams, their warm glow flickering against clean stone and dark timber. Somewhere inside the temple hall, monks chant evening sutras, a low, rhythmic sound that moves in waves, steady and soothing, like a heartbeat extended into a choir. The abbot approaches you, an elderly man with a gentle stoop and a smile that makes you feel like he already knows every embarrassing thing you've ever done and forgives you anyway. He asks about your travels, your destination, your experience in the wind corridor. When you describe the chaos, he nods knowingly. The river has moods, he says. Just like people. It rewards patience more than strength. You consider arguing, but then remember your noodle-armed struggle earlier. The abbot seems to register the memory on your face and chuckles softly. Before you retire for the night in the guest quarters, he leads you to the balcony overlooking the river. The darkness has deepened, moonlight spilling like silver paint across the water. Fireflies blink along the reeds, drawing drifting constellations. This place has watched countless travelers, the abbot murmurs. Merchants, scholars, soldiers, refugees. The river holds all their stories. When you pass through the Yangtze, you listen not just to water, but to memory. He lets the words settle. then leaves you alone with the night. For a long time you stand there, breathing in the stillness. Your journey feels both ancient and brand new. You feel like a number in a ledger kept by the river, one scratch among 1,000, but also like your scratch matters in its own small way. Eventually, the chill nudges you toward sleep. You pad to your small room, lit by a single lamp and smelling faintly of cedar. The bedding is simple but welcoming. As you lie down, the river's distant whisper drifts through the half-open window, gentle, steady, and perhaps even a little protective. You fall asleep with your fingers curled slightly, as if still holding a paddle. Tomorrow, the journey continues.